So welcome to the 6th session of the Instron Biomedical Testing Open House. This session is critical requirements of materials testing systems and regulated environments. I'm Veronica Costa, and I'm going to be your host for this morning's session. For this discussion, we have Jim Ritchey, who's our Instron's Global Service Innovation Director, and he'll be reviewing regulatory requirements typically associated with materials testing systems. So this includes CFR 21 Part 11, 21 CFR Part 11, and 21 CFR Part 8 to 20. He's also going to cover some challenges that are often faced by the system supplier and the laboratory user. With over 35 years of experience at Instron, Jim's understanding of our vast range of products and customer knowledge makes him an invaluable resource. In his current role as Global Service Innovation Director, Jim works closely with our service engineers and our applications teams around the world to ensure our products, our services, and our partnerships exceed our customers' expectations. And Jim's joined by Ronna Ungar, who is a senior technical support engineer on our service team. And if you've ever called into our service support line, you may have spoken with Ronna directly. She has an extensive knowledge of our software platforms and is an Instron IQOQ expert. And to finish up the session, she's going to talk with us about some of the specific products found in the regulated space. So this includes things like IQOQ and Compliance Consultation. And one fun fact about Ronna and Jim is that they're both Cornell graduates. Go Big Red. So for today's presentation, they're going to use about 45 minutes for their discussion, and then they should have some time for questions. So if you find that you have any questions along the way, please feel free to send them into our chat box. And then one last thing that I did want to mention before we begin, if you've attended any of our other sessions, you may already be aware of this. But for those of you that are interested in receiving the single-use code for free access to the Essentials of Biomedical Testing e-learning course, this is just a quick reminder that you'll want to complete that post-event survey that will display immediately following the session. And again, I'll be sure to mention that at the end. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Jim and Ronna.
Thank you very much. Welcome all out there to this session entitled Critical Requirements of Materials Testing Systems in Regulated Environments. We hope you've been enjoying these new virtual sessions from us here at Instron in Norwood, Mass. during our Bio Week. It's a very exciting new way for us to share information, and we're hoping you find it useful. And I'm moving on. And here we are. Obviously, hopefully it's obvious that I'm Jim, and I'll handle the first half of the session. And on the right side of the screen, there's my bio partner, Ronna Ungar, and she's going to handle the second session. As Veronica said, we're targeting about 45 minutes for the session, and this is the outline of what we plan to cover. First, I'm going to go through the details and differences associated with the 21 CFR regulations, in particular, the two biggies in this space, 21 CFR Part 11 and Part 820. I'm also going to touch base on some of the ISO standards in this space as well. And then I'll explore the typical regulatory challenges for materials testing suppliers and users. This will be kind of my subjective views on how companies like Instron, as well as med device companies and pharma companies like yours, wrestle with and have evolved in their handling of these regulations over time. And then lastly, Ron is going to give us the kind of detailed overview of IQOQ and associated required services like PQ and more. So here we go. As you probably know, the 21 CFR regulations have been around for decades at this point. But honestly, as I travel around and visit our customers, I often see a fair amount of confusion when you start rattling off these regulatory numbers. I mean, even the acronyms. I mean, how many people actually know what CFR even stands for? If you guessed cost and freight, which is a common one, well, no, you'd be wrong there. But it actually stands for the Code of Federal Regulations. And so now that we've got all that cleared up, let's take a look at these regulations. As I said, the two most common regulations that we encounter in the materials testing space is 21 CFR Part 820 and 21 CFR Part 11. Although they're sometimes thought of synonymously, but of course that's very incorrect. 21 CFR Part 820 and 21 CFR Part 11 are two totally different regulations that come from the FDA. And that's Federal Drug Administration for those that are tracking all the acronyms that we're going to use here today. I like to think of Part 820 as the big overarching regulation that companies like yours build around their quality systems. This QSR pushes organizations to establish, as we see here, good manufacturing practices where processes and procedures are documented and followed. IQOQ is a typical service that we provide as part of adherence to this regulation. On the other hand, Part 11, and by the way, you're going to hear me refer to these things as Part 11 and Part 820. Most folks drop that 21 CFR part, just gets a little bit too wordy. So Part 11 is a very specific regulation associated with moving away from printed and stored documents to electronic storage procedures. So let's first get started by taking a look at Part 820. As I said, 820 is all about the establishment of quality systems within your organizations. The quality system, by the way, is not just the tensile test on your Instron that happens before a part or device gets shipped. It's the entire framework for which the design, manufacturing, packaging, labeling, distribution, installation, service, and ongoing maintenance are all planned for, established, done, checked for adherence, and acted upon. I know it's a lot of words, but it's truly true. It spans from the very beginning of the design of a medical device to its obsolescence and beyond. Product and process improvements need to be tracked, they need to be documented, and they need to be implemented in order to adhere to this regulation. It's a very labor-intensive process, as I'm sure most of you guys out there are well aware. And it can take years to sort out and master. It's worth noting, I kind of have that last bullet there, that these processes are typically the responsibility of the entire organization. It's your organization, all the way up to the executive levels. I mean, the company truly has to own this entire process to make it successful. Looking at some of the details underneath the 820, two major components of the proper design of the quality system involves verification and validation. It's all about the review of the objective evidence for a specific intended use that can be constantly or consistently fulfilled. Additionally, organizations have to integrate CAPAs, which are corrective and preventive action, feedback loops for the designs of their processes as well. Objectivity, as I mentioned, very important. Evidence must be specific, like the examples I kind of have here. The first one, which is compare the dimensions of a component with established tolerances. Like that's a great example of verification, where it's a specific statement like that and you're comparing them. Kind of on the result side of the verification, of course, that's the validation. And I kind of put a great example up there for a coronary stent. And that is that it must withstand 400 million cycles of loading and unloading. And everybody, of course, out there knows what 400 million cycles is mimicking, right? This is the fun fact that you can carry away from this. 400 million cycles is 10 years worth of heartbeats, which is what those types of products have to withstand in the validation process. And then lastly here, you have to say what happened and document it. Yes and no, typically doesn't cut it. The process is, this process is a critical part of the 820 overall process. And again, this is where the IQOQ and PQ come into play. But again, I don't want to steal Ronna's thunder. She's going to go into much more detail about these a little bit later. I did think it was important to kind of look at the CFR, the part 820 through a few different lenses, and kind of looking through the FDA lens. I wanted to kind of give a few important quips regarding this as you kind of look at it from their perspective. First and foremost, if it isn't documented, it didn't happen. It's a little like a tree falling in the woods scenario. You kind of have to have everything documented, and if you can't see it, then honestly, it probably didn't happen. Secondly, if it's documented, that must be exactly what happened. And so what I mean by that is as part of the process, before you check it, you should know what the expected results are supposed to be. And then the actual result of that action that you measure must match the expected result. Exactly. And that's kind of an important piece of this. Next, medical device companies need to carefully define processes, document the process, and then track the implementation of that process. As I said, ultimately, you own your quality process and its associated responsibilities. We, on the material testing side, we're just here to kind of make it easier for you. But in the end, it's your process. And then lastly, say what you're going to do what you said you were going to do, and then be prepared to prove it. I think if you've gone through any of the auditing process, auditors want to see this kind of thoroughness, and so you really do have to be thorough and precise throughout this entire process. So that's it kind of from the FDA perspective. I did want to kind of take you through the way we kind of see it on the materials testing side as well. Remember that the relationship you develop with your testing system suppliers is a pretty important one. We are increasingly being asked to participate in the development of manufacturers' quality processes. We know our equipment, we know our software, and certainly we understand this process pretty intimately. Suppliers like us at Instron can help you guys enhance the quality of the process and additionally save significant amounts of time. The best approach, I think, starts with understanding the testing system manufacturer's recommendations. And we typically lay these out before we install systems or upgrades to software. Typically, if you're not planning to follow those recommendations, you should document why not. The recommendations include scheduled maintenance plans as well as calibration plans, including the frequencies by which you're going to be doing these things. And they're applicable across the board for production areas, QC areas, and R&D areas. So not only should you be documenting and following the process and procedures, you actually should be qualifying the equipment as well. And that includes having the actual calibration and IQOQ completed. Usually you as the device or drug manufacturer are handling the PQ portions, but material testing suppliers like Instron can even assist there and can save you a ton of time. So I think you should always keep that in consideration as you're going through the process. Lastly, once you have the process established, it's important to validate it. And that includes doing, as we say here, repeatability testing, reproducibility testing, and using different tools like GR&R, Gauge R&R, and other statistical processes. Make sure you're having these types of discussions, as we said, up front with suppliers like us, and we can help you kind of simplify processes and ensure that they're totally robust. We really truly can help quite a bit in this area. I did want to add a few extra words about ISO 13485, since we're frequently asked about that relative to Part 820. It should be noted these two regulations are indeed they're quite similar, but they can't be integrated and used synonymously, meaning that if your company goes through the process of adhering to ISO 13485, for example, that doesn't mean that you automatically meet the rigors of 21 CFR Part 820. The key difference between these two regulations, as you can kind of see here, I've just tried to highlight a couple of them, is how they're mandated and checked. Part 820 is externally mandated by the FDA, while the ISO standard is typically decided upon and driven by internal workings within your company. For all med device and pharma companies, non-compliance with Part 820 is simply just not an option. You have to do that. It has to be there, and you have to be able to pass the scrutiny of the FDA. ISO 13485 compliance, although can be an option, it doesn't carry all the requirements of 820, so organizations like yours should perform gap analysis to really determine additional processes that you need to add to kind of bridge the gap so that you can meet both these regulations if that's a requirement. Again, subtle differences, but pretty important to consider. So moving on to the other biggie on the regulation side, I wanted to talk a little bit about 21 CFR Part 11. You know, it was first introduced, some of us can recall, maybe not all of us, but it was introduced back in 1997 after, even at that point, after years of debate and work. It's indeed had a long storied history as organizations and suppliers have struggled to understand the subtle details outlined in that regulation and how it would ultimately be enforced by the FDA. At one point in this process, in between 1997 and now, the enforcement of the regulation was temporarily put on hold while the FDA crafted a guidance document to better explain the regulation. There was a lot of pushback. But now it's considered a totally solid, robust regulation that most organizations are either in conformance of or chasing to be in conformance of. In the end, the standard simply outlines the criteria under which electronic records and signatures are considered to be trustworthy and equivalent to the corresponding paper records. The regulation not only ensures integrity, authenticity, and confidentiality of electronic data, but also the corresponding electronic signatures that are used to indicate changes or different paths within the process. The regulation itself is not that big and long. It's broken into 3 subparts: general provisions, electronic records, and electronic signatures. And here we can take a quick moment to take a look at those 3 things and talk a little bit about them. As you can imagine, with the evolving guidance and corresponding enforcement, there's an entire consulting industry which has grown up around this. That's what some of those pictures are there. So if you're struggling in this area, there's plenty of help out there for folks that need it. And in the end, the regulations become a much better understood process, and most companies have embraced it in some manner at this point in time. So going through these relatively quickly, in the general provisions section, the first subpart, the main takeaway is that organizations must be able to prove that their electronic approaches are as trustworthy as their paper and ink approaches. It's that simple. That's the general gist there. When you look down at the electronic record section, here it's where it really talks about a lot of the details. Companies must provide that mentioned authenticity and integrity, as well as proof of validation processes, appropriate document storage and retention, secure access protocols, making sure that security is an integral part of the process, and then specifically, audit trails that capture all the interactions of the users of the system. An example that we see on the materials testing side in regard to this is, the need for time-stamped audit trails is important when a user makes a change to a testing method, for example. It's part of the quality process. Usually an authority level has to be established for the user, and that would be defined in the system, and then they would be required to electronically sign any changes that they might make. And then kind of that last subgroup, the electronic signature section, includes all the rules around that signature I just mentioned there, and around the identity and the confirmation and the required dates and renderings to provide a robust and really secure acknowledgement of the process. So it's a lot of words and a lot of details, but it's a pretty basic kind of regulation, honestly. Very briefly, I also wanted to talk about a couple of the high-level do's and don'ts. Again, very briefly, when it comes to conformance, the big do is you should talk to companies like Instron. We've got a new traceability software module. It's part of our Blue Hill Universal software that allows users to create compliant processes and procedures for their lab. If you hang around later in the day, Elaine Gordonov, our software product manager, is going to be exploring some of those details, so you can learn all about the traceability module. Of course, one of the big don'ts, and the key is you don't want to ignore either of these important regulations, because nobody wants to end up on the receiving end of an FDA 483 form, or even worse, an actual warning letter from the FDA. I only mention that because that's the terminology that you kind of hear out in the world when it comes to the big don'ts and the problem areas of non-compliance to these types of regulations. I wanted to finish up my section here by spending a little time reviewing regulatory challenges that are faced by both the users of the testing systems, but also the suppliers like us at Instron. These things are not, although I say they're simple, going through the process, can present a certain amount of challenges. So on the material testing user side of things, that's I'm talking about from your perspective as testing users. There's a bunch of challenges. One common fallacy that I hear out there all the time is the notion that materials testing systems manufacturers can provide 21 CFR Part 11 compliant software with their systems. Well, in reality, it's truly up to you and your organization to establish processes and procedures that lead to compliant actions and activities. There's no such thing as an out-of-the-box compliant software package. I'm sorry, there just isn't. But compliancy requires the evaluation and the implementation, and it's a lot of work, of all of your processes as they integrate that software into your QSR process. Don't get me wrong, the material testing company software has to provide the appropriate structure and features that allow you, the users, to create those processes and procedures that meet the requirements of the standards. It might seem like a subtle distinction, but a software package that can create a hard copy of a test method and create hard copy results reports that can be printed, signed, and stored according to a company's operating procedures. Literally, it could also be called 21 CFR Part 11 compliant. But there are file cabinets across the globe that are filling up with documents, and it can be difficult to find those documents during an audit. And that's why the real intent of the regulation, the 21 CFR Part 11 regulation, was to begin eliminating those types of processes and move to more efficient and effective, secure electronic processes. Yeah, and that's it. The goal of eliminating paper continues to kind of be broadcast across regulated organizations around the globe. In order to achieve that process, materials testing software should provide the user the capability of transitioning to the preferred electronic record approach with the security of knowing they have all the required traceability, date-stamped audit trails, secure authority check, authorization checks, and all the e-signatures and recorded authorizations. Probably, again, reflecting on this, probably one of the biggest challenges that we see is the fact that, software keeps changing out there. And of course, the FDA wants nothing to change when it comes to a particular quality system and producing a medical device or pharma product. So kind of whether it's internal operating system changes or upgrading of a specific software application used somewhere in the process, these types of changes require revalidation, which can be both, kind of painful and time consuming. Again, working closely with software providers and material testing suppliers like Instron, is paramount That's how you can really, truly reduce the amount of time and the pain when it comes to this revalidation process. So that's what I see as kind of the biggies on your side of things. You know, that does translate, of course, to some real challenges on our side of things as well. You know, because every lab will likely approach compliancy somewhat differently. Material testing suppliers have to provide testing software that will conform to regulatory requirements, but while remaining flexible enough to kind of meet the wide variety of application needs that are out there. As I mentioned, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, and it requires a lot of communication and a lot of work between suppliers and users to meet all of these regulatory requirements. Furthermore, interpretations of the standards have kind of varied within different organizations. And the standards themselves, as I mentioned, have gone through several iterations, which included follow-up guidance documents and other things from the FDA in hopes of clarifying. With all this complexity at play, the process can truly be daunting for medical device and pharma companies, and potentially overwhelming for companies like us on the materials testing side that truly aren't under the direct mandate of the regulations. But you know, we also have to provide systems that can operate successfully within those environments. So that can sometimes be a challenge for us, because you know it does require a lot of back and forth, a lot of communication that maybe we haven't always been required to do. You know, further complicating the situation is the fact that laboratories, you know, often test highly confidential materials, drugs, or devices that carry a significant amount of intellectual property with them. So, you know, we have to be careful in how we work with you, and you have to be careful in how you establish that relationship and the communication channels with a materials testing supplier like us. Then next, material testing suppliers, we need to focus on discussions around these processes and testing without kind of interfering with that proprietary nature of the products. Understanding those subtleties, again, is also paramount to being able to provide the most efficient and effective services for laboratories like yourselves. And then, you know, kind of lastly, I don't know if it's a challenge necessarily, but it's something that we don't necessarily have to do in every laboratory, but it's, you know, non-disclosure agreements are often employed to kind of protect the lab and provide the necessary security to work with organizations in a collaborative way. It's these collaborations, you know, they can incorporate the strengths of both organizations to make sure that validation process is completed smoothly and without conflict. And that's one way we certainly would recommend working with companies like yourself. So I'm wrapping up here, and I'm gonna now turn it over to Ronna to talk a little bit more specifically about some of these products. So I'm gonna flip it over, and Ronna, I think it can go to you now.
Yes. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Jim. So now we're going to shift gears a little bit and discuss IQOQ validation in more detail, as well as some other regulatory services that Instron offers to our customers. As Jim alluded to, 21 CFR Part 820 requires that all software is validated to ensure that it's functioning as intended. IQOQ is that validation process and is critical in compliance with the standard. As Jim also mentioned, there are other global equivalents to this standard. I use the term equivalence loosely, such as ISO 13485 that have similar requirements for software validation. Instron offers IQOQ validation packages for our software platforms, including Blue Hill Universal, Wave Matrix 2, and others. Each Instron IQOQ package is tailored to the specific testing needs of each customer and testing system. Our robust validation packages are then completed on site by trained Instron field service engineers. Before we go any further, we have yet another acronym, IQOQ. IQ, or Installation Qualification, establishes that the system and software have been installed correctly. OQ, or Operational Qualification, validates proper operation of the frame and its ability to produce valid results through the software. The OQ, in combination with transducer verifications, is designed to confirm the proper operation of the testing system and its ability to produce valid results. Sometimes you may also hear IQOQ PQ instead of just IQOQ. What is PQ and why is it frequently left off? PQ, or Performance Qualification, demonstrates that the process or equipment performs as intended in a consistent manner over time. Because the PQ is specific to each customer, OEM vendors providing validation services for their equipment often offer IQ and OQ only. While most of the PQ is each individual customer's responsibility to document and implement, portions of Instron IQOQ documentation and on-site method development can aid in PQ development. Customers who are regulated by the FDA and equivalent standards need to document that their testing equipment and associated software is functioning as it should. The FDA regulations that include IQOQ apply to companies involved in the design, manufacturing, packaging, labeling, storage, installation, and servicing of all finished devices intended for human use. This includes both medical device manufacturers in the United States, as well as device manufacturers located abroad who plan to ship into the United States. Customers in other regulated areas, such as NADCAP and aerospace, may choose to perform an IQOQ validation on their software and systems as well. For medical device and pharmaceutical companies, software validation is critical for compliance with regulatory standards. There are several benefits to purchasing IQOQ validation through Instron. Offering both transducer verifications as well as IQOQ validations allows Instron's customers to purchase all services from a single source. Calibration and IQOQ services are performed at your site by trained Instron field service engineers. The IQOQ validation and transducer verifications, which are also sometimes referred to as transducer calibrations, work together to ensure software works as intended and yields accurate, reliable results. Also, you save time and resources by using Instron professional services to complete the IQOQ validation testing. Our experienced service team will use Instron's proven, robust documentation pack that is tailored to your individual needs and contains necessary IQOQ documents, calculation worksheets, and manuals. By having multiple sites purchase IQOQ through Instron, you ensure consistency in the validation documents across all sites. It also reduces the workload compared to having each site develop their own validation documents. Lastly, purchasing IQOQ validation through Instron also provides peace of mind. Instron knows the full details of how our systems and software are designed to function, ensuring thorough validation checks with objective evidence for robustness during an audit. Now, let's delve a bit more into the Instron IQOQ document package. Each Instron IQOQ validation binder is specific to the customer and frame it is intended for, and is customized with the customer name and system ID. The validation binder is prepared at our Instron headquarters in Norwood, Massachusetts, and includes a printed copy of the validation documents, along with a USB containing reference material and the files for the calculation validation. The binder is then completed on site by one of our trained Instron field service engineers and is provided to the customer upon completion for incorporation into their quality management system. As you might expect, an Instron IQOQ contains parts for both installation qualification, IQ, and operational qualification, OQ. The IQ confirms that the software and system is installed correctly. The IQ checklist includes items checked at frame installation, including installation of the software, frame safety features such as the emergency stop and travel limits, proper environmental conditions, and ensuring that the order is complete and that all parts and documents are provided. Our new 6800 and 3400 systems have additional checks, including Smart Close Air Kit functionality. The operational qualification, OQ, checks that the system and software are performing as expected. Instron verifications and IQOQ validation work together to ensure that the system is doing what it's supposed to and that the data coming from the transducers is accurate and reliable. The OQ contains references to the Instron transducer verification certificates. The bulk of the OQ is the software functionality check. In this section, the most common functions and features of the software are checked to confirm that they are acting as intended. As new features are released, the document package is updated accordingly. When a customer purchases Instron IQOQ, they work with the sales team to choose the specific calculations that they are using in the software for their specific testing needs. The chosen calculations are then included in the calculation validation section. To validate a calculation, the Blue Hill algorithm is duplicated in Microsoft Excel and then checked against the result from Blue Hill. For all components of the Instron OQ, documented evidence is provided where appropriate. This ensures that the Instron IQOQ documents are robust and contain the necessary objective evidence for review during an audit. As Jim mentioned earlier, from the FDA perspective, if it isn't documented, it didn't happen. Not to steal Elaine's thunder from her webinar this afternoon, but I wanted to briefly touch on traceability as it relates to IQOQ. As Jim mentioned briefly, Blue Hill Traceability is a tool to aid in compliance with Part 11. To reiterate, this is a different standard than Part 820, which governs IQOQ, but many companies must comply with both standards. There are four main components to traceability: security, revision history, electronic signatures, and the audit trail. These components allow customers to track who did what, when, and why, and prove it in a secure audit trail. Validation of the components of Blue Hill Traceability module is incorporated into the Instron document package. As with the standard Instron OQ, objective evidence is provided where relevant to ensure robustness of the documents in the event of an audit. For more information on traceability, be sure to attend the webinar this afternoon. Transducer calibrations also play a role in IQOQ validation of the system. To ensure that your testing instrument is providing accurate data, Instron always recommends initial calibration of all transducers upon installation of the equipment on site, and recalibration if certain components are repaired or replaced. Since most materials testing instruments now utilize software, a common question from our customers is whether they should perform a recalibration when software is updated or upgraded. The FDA has provided guidance on this subject and recommends that whenever software is changed, that revalidation is conducted to assess the impact of the change on the entire software system. The guidance goes further to explain the importance of demonstrating that even unchanged portions of the software system have not been adversely affected. For this reason, in an FDA-regulated environment, Instron recommends that recalibration be conducted as part of a system revalidation after changes to the software. Finally, I wanted to touch on PQ and additional consultation services that Instron can provide for our regulated customers. Since performance qualification is complex and unique to each customer's specific testing setup and procedures, it is typically the customer's responsibility to demonstrate that the system and software perform in a consistent manner over time. Instron's support of PQ processes is typically limited to the validation of results reported by Instron software, but consultation services can be provided to assist customers with their PQ processes. Instron can provide assistance with updating of operator guides, system equivalency documents, and other such items after a software upgrade or purchase of a new system. Please contact your local sales personnel who can work with our IQOQ department for your specific project needs. Additional services can also be provided that will streamline your validation process and save you a considerable amount of time as you upgrade materials testing software or operating systems. All right, that's it for our presentation. Now, before we actually take some time for questions, I wanted to remind everybody of other sessions we have slated for today. As you see, we have 3 more sessions today. It's not too late to sign up, so if you head back to our website, you can sign up and join in. Now, I'll let Jim join back in and we'll see if we can tackle some of the questions. If we don't get to your question live, we'll get back to you in the next day or so with some answers. Okay, so it looks like we have a couple of questions. So the first question is, my company has our transducers calibrated every year. Do we need to do the same annually with IQOQ validations? So that's an excellent question and one we get asked a lot. And the answer is no. Unlike transducer calibrations, IQOQ does not have to be done annually. Customers can keep their existing validation as long as you don't change the software or the PC that the validation was done on. If you plan to update your software or change the computer or get a new operating system, which we're seeing a lot now as customers move away from Windows 7 and on to Windows 10, then you'll need to revalidate and redo the IQOQ. Now, that being said, customers can always choose to perform an IQOQ more often and more frequently than is required, but it isn't required annually the way that transducer calibrations are. So the next question we have is, which calculations are validated in the calculation suite? So IQOQ validation in the standard, it says it should be replicating the software as it's intended to be used. So the calculations that are validated should replicate those that you're using in your test methods. So at the time of quotation, you'll work with our sales representatives to determine which calculations best suit your needs, and those will be the ones quoted in the IQOQ document package. Jim, we have another question that I think would be good for you. What sort of guidance can Instron provide when it comes to compliance with Part 11?
Yeah, so I think that typically is, again, handled either directly through your local sales engineer that's in your territory. They can talk with you about this, or even our internal group up here, excuse me, at our headquarters. It typically, it depends again on the processes that you're using, but we can certainly assist in integrating our traceability solutions, excuse me, to help you out in that area. It just depends on the specific situation, though. Yeah.
Excellent. So we have another question here relating to transducer calibration and sort of how it ties into IQOQ. So transducer calibrations or verifications are a separate service that Instron provides, where a field service engineer checks your load cells, extensometers, other transducers against a known standard and makes sure that the results are accurate to the degree that they're assigned to be. So those services are always quoted separate from IQOQ, but the verification certificates are referenced in the IQOQ as they tie together to the complete Instron validation package. So the IQOQ confirms that the software and system are installed correctly and working correctly, and then the calibration certificates confirm that the data coming in from the transducers is accurate. So I think that should answer the question, and if not, just let us know. One last question, can Instron simply do the PQ as well as the IQOQ? So as I mentioned, The PQ is a very complex process and is very specific to each customer's testing and setup. It includes things all the way from sample preparation, operator training, all the way through to the actual results provided by the system. So Instron can provide consultation services to assist with the PQ, but there is no standard PQ template like we have for IQOQ that we can offer. So I think that about wraps it up. So Jim, if you're good, I'm going to hand it back over to Veronica, and she can do some wrap up. Thanks everyone for listening. We got some
Thanks a
excellent
lot.
questions.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, great. Thanks so much, Jim and Ronna. So that is going to do it for this session. And just had a couple things I wanted to mention before we wrap up. As Ronna mentioned here on the slide, we do have some great sessions that are coming up for the rest of the day and again tomorrow. So if any of those are of interest to you, there's still time to sign up. A few people asked in the chat box about the recordings. So we will plan on sending out a copy of the recording as well as the slide deck to you. The recording will be available on our YouTube channel in just a short while. And then again, one last reminder is about the free access code to the Essentials of Biomedical Testing e-learning course. So when we end the session in just a minute, you'll see the survey pop up. So if you could answer those questions, and then there's one question related to the e-learning course. It'll ask if you'd like access to the course. You just click yes, and we'll take care of that for you. So with that said, thanks so much, Jim and Ronna, for a great presentation and for taking the time to answer some really great questions. And thanks to you all for attending. We really appreciate your time. We hope you have a great day, and we hope to see you at some of our other sessions.